Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Henchman's Memoirs. This is our Dark Souls of Drakkenheim campaign diary for 5th edition. And when we last left off our heroes, they had reached the Queen's Garden there in the inner city, and they were trying to recover some of these eldritch lilies. Our party consists of Thaddeus, who I believe at some point in this long weekend where we played, he got taken down to 0 hit points. And what the player is doing is basically he has these two different personalities that can manifest for this druid, Thaddeus, and then just Deus. And Thaddeus is a little bit goofy and kind of wide-eyed, innocent, and searching for this family carpet thing. And then Deus doesn't care about the carpet and is much more sort of edgy and just concerned about, amassing power. So at some point, he had been knocked down to 0 hit points, and when he woke up, he was back to being Thaddeus. Here we have Atticus, our human artificer. Here we have Pietor, the human monk. And then last but not least is Nexel, the hagborn sorcerer. So they had gotten into the Queen's Garden with no encounters, and now they just wanted to find some eldritch lilies and get out. And it's really cool because there's sort of a mini game here that the dungeon dudes have written up. They use it for searching for delirium inside the city, and then they use it for searching for lilies here in the park, right? Where everybody rolls against, I think it's a DC 15, and you can roll, in this case, nature, or investigation, or perception, or survival, whichever, based on how you're searching to find these lilies. And so the park is just a maze of little walkways and terraces and gazebos and hedge mazes and everything else, right? So you don't actually map out the interior. The characters just get in there and they start rolling. And each time everybody rolls, you have an hour of searching and you get to roll. If there's enough successes, they find one of these ponds that has some eldritch lilies. If there's not enough successes, if there's as many failures as successes, then they roll on this random table to determine there's a whole separate set of random encounters just for this sort of mini game. Now, let the listener know there's actually a whole separate story going on in this garden about this duchess, and her relationship with the king and what happened to her, and there's this whole big story. The characters cared nothing about learning any of that. They were just here to get some lilies and get out as quickly as possible. So they get in there and they start rolling, and their first set of rolls are not that great, and they encounter these false eldritch lilies that are basically like mimics. They kind of look like them, and then they want to cast charm on you and get you to step into these little ponds they're in, when a great big delirium sludge will jump out and kill you to death. They managed to get past that first encounter, and then on their second try, I think somebody spent inspiration again or used guidance or something. They managed to get enough rolls that they found these eldritch lilies. So I looked it up, and it's this pond full of these sort of dryad kind of creatures. And I described them as really, really slowly moving and picking up these lilies and everything. And the party was like, okay, how can we sneak up there and get these lilies without attracting these things' attention? Well, you'll never guess what. 5th edition has made Pass Without Trace so overpowered that basically, even if he rolled a 1, the monk, Pietor, could not be noticed by the passive perception of these dryad creatures. So he just, described himself very slowly, moving as slowly as them, getting into the water and kind of doing this to the water to get him to get some to float over to him. But there's still, you roll how many of the eldritch lilies there are and how many of these mimic lilies there are, and he still has to save if he grabs one of the mimics by mistake. So now he's making perception checks to try to tell the difference. I'm rolling, and another player is helping me roll to figure out whether he's about to pick up a real one or a false one. And he managed to do well enough on the perception checks that he didn't get stunned, he didn't get charmed. He got 5 eldritch lilies, and they were ready to just GTFO, get on the road and be gone. And so that's what they did. They snuck back out of the park, and now all they had to do was get back to the barracks without another encounter. And of course, one of them, innocently said, "Can't we just go back the way we came?" Well, not in my Drakkenheim, because it's like this nightmare city where you can get turned around. You think you know exactly where you're going, and you turn around a corner that you think you know where it is, and all of a sudden it's a completely different street, or it's a dead end, or whatever like that. So they did have to roll encounters on the way out. And somebody rolled a 1 for one of those encounters, right? They were going slow. I think they were out of Pass Without Trace, but they were just trying to be really, really sneaky and get out of there without getting into any trouble. They rolled an encounter, and again, they rolled on the table for exploring the inner city, and it's a bunch of phase spiders. It's enough phase spiders, in fact, to easily probably kill the party. I think it was like 2d8 or something phase spiders, right? But it says in the description, the party sees, the road ahead is crisscrossed with all these webs and stuff. And I said, now there is a path, right? If you go right down the middle, you can get through. And they're like, oh, of course, right? But it says in the description, the phase spiders don't do anything unless someone tampers with the webs. And my party was just like, you know what? We're going to go back. We're going to take a whole nother hour. We're going to roll a whole nother encounter check rather than try to get past this. So on a technicality, they made it. They got out of there, and they eventually make it back to the Drakkenheim garrison. And when they make it back to the garrison, Handsome Lang is gone, but his sister, Petra Lang, is there, who Pietro kind of has a little bit of a crush on. So they're glad to see her, and she introduces them to Elias Drexel, who is the faction head of the Hooded Lanterns. So now they've met a second faction head in this long weekend of us gaming. And, so that's a big deal, big accomplishment. And they've scored some points with him, too. And he asked them all about the Silver Order and about what's going on with this Oscar Yoren character. So they basically bring him up to speed, and he tells them, well, we want those contamination removal potions, Aqua Expurgo or whatever it's called. And, if you can get him making quality content for us, making quality potions for us, that would be fine by us. But, if that's not possible, we need those potions somehow. You need to get this guy's research and be able to recreate it or whatever. And they said, well, can you give us a letter that says basically we're there on your behalf to find out why some of these potions have been contaminated? Can you kind of give us a little extra oomph that hopefully we can get in to meet the leader? And Elias is like, sure, here's a letter. And also, I want you to kind of feel out the Hooded Lanterns to see if they are on the up and up about their intentions in the city. And then also if they might be able to join us in an attack on this city gate that is controlled by these gnolls. Right? And the players are like, well, they've told us what their intentions are. They're on the up and up. But Elias Drexel says, you need to understand the fate of the Empire is tied up to what happens to the city of Drakkenheim. The whole empire is kind of in civil war right now, but who gets control of this city could determine who becomes the next emperor or empress. So even though they say that their intentions are just to clean up the city, the church has gotten involved in politics before, and we want you to sort of try to scratch beneath the surface a little bit and see what you can find out. So they're like, okie doke, we're going to go back to Eckerman's Mill. We're going to find out what's happening with Oscar Yoren, and then we'll take your message to the Knights of the Silver Order. So the next thing you know, here they are back at Reed Manor dealing with these same 4 apprentices. And they were doing some intimidation checks and some persuasion checks and whatever else, because of course the apprentices are still hesitant to even bother the master. And the players are like, oh, well, we have a business proposition. It's like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. We don't need your business. But eventually somebody rolled well enough and came up with a clever line. And one of them goes off to get Oscar Yoren, right? So he comes back in. I know this mini doesn't look a heck of a lot like him, but it's what I had on hand that looked sort of like an alchemist kind of guy. And the party starts talking to him. They don't just want to say, we know you need eldritch lilies and we've got them, right? So they're trying to play it all coy, and they're being like, oh, well, maybe if you had the reagents you need, you could make more potions for the hooded lanterns. And he's like, oh, that's none of your business. And they're like, well, maybe we could get them for you. And he's like, I have people that I trust to get supplies for me. And they're like, oh, okay, well, they're turning to each other. I guess if he doesn't want the eldritch lilies, he doesn't want the eldritch lilies, we'll just leave, So then Oscar is like, all right, obviously, I think I was doing a voice like this. Obviously, you know the truth about the eldritch lilies. How much do you want for them? And they're like, oh, well, we want more information about your research. We want to know, we want some of your research notes and stuff. And I just couldn't see a way to let that work. Oscar's whole business is based on him being the only one who can produce these things. And, he spent years refining this process. He'd be cutting his own throat to share any of his research. I just knew, he'd rather fight them and die, or whatever. He's not going to give them the stuff for any persuasion roll. So then Nexel decided to try a new track and acts, like he's talking to one of the other players, and he's like, oh, what about that other guy that said he knew how to make these things? Maybe we should just go to talk to him. And Oscar is like, who are you talking about? And he's like, oh, well, we're not at liberty to say. So then Oscar decides to pop it off, and we roll for initiative. So things went pretty bad for the party pretty quickly. I think these guys were over here, and Oscar had Cone of Cold in the initiative. And I'm pretty sure Nexel must have been over here because basically he cast this Cone of Cold at these three, and both of these guys would have probably been down if they didn't have absorb elements as a reaction or whatever. So when they saw him pop, that was his highest level spell, but when they saw that go off, they're like, oh Lord, this is going to get very serious very fast. So Thaddeus wild shapes into a brown bear, or a grizzly bear, and is literally wrecking shop. I can't really put that there without blocking your view, but he's coming after these apprentices. He's jumping up on this table. I do remember that Atticus was able to trigger this like thunder wave kind of thing that pushed them back and stunned them a little bit. And so somebody was down over here. It might have been Nexel, or it might have been old Pietor. But things were getting pretty rowdy for the party pretty quick. Fortunately, they were not rolling garbage. They were actually rolling pretty well, and they were starting to take these apprentices down. And he gets across the table. He gets across. This guy is backed up into the corner. I think the bear had probably killed these two guys. And things were starting to get particularly bad for Oscar. So at this point, there's a door right behind him that leads to his private chambers. And, he's a smart guy. He sizes up the situation. He only attacked these four because, none of them was wearing any impressive armor or carrying any, it didn't look like they were necessarily powerful adventurers. But he was finding out they're a lot more powerful than he had hoped. So he decides he's going to get out of this by using greater invisibility. And there was a major breakdown of communication and trust between me and my players when Oscar cast this spell, because I was using it to get out of the fight, and I was going to open this door and run into my private quarters and get away. But the players all ganged up on me to say they would get an attack of opportunity because they saw the door open. It would be a disadvantage, but they would still get an attack of opportunity against Oscar, which I was going to give to them if they were entitled to it. I just, from my 3rd edition days, I was like, no, there's no way that you get that attack. But so they were rolling their attacks, they were rolling their damage, and that's when I Googled the answer and found out, no, it has to be a target that you can see. So, they all agreed that was bull honky do, and now all of a sudden I want to play by the rules and not by the spirit of the rules. Normally I overrule everything. I say I'm an old school DM. So yeah, there were some hurt feelings, there were some harsh words exchanged. But Oscar did get through this door and close it, and the party wisely was like, you know what, we're not going to chase that guy into this room who's a high level caster, and we have no idea what other spells he has prepared. So they ran over and they grabbed this guy, and the artificer put his Iron Man gauntlet on his shoulder and was like, you're going to tell us everything. And he totally agreed to tell him everything. And Oscar, of course, fled the scene. One funny thing about that didn't occur to me until a little later. So now Oscar Yoren has confronted them and escaped. And of course, Joel of Osteen confronted them earlier, and they killed a bunch of his guys, and he escaped. And before that, the Rat Prince, they had a confrontation with him, and he escaped. And then, of course, Talon, I had said, was going to come back in a villainous form later in the story. So I said we were starting to work up sort of a Sinister Six situation here. At least, the Fearsome Four are already all knocking around in the background, waiting for me to bring them back into the story. But anyway, so the party starts searching his quarters, and then he's got this locked door down to the basement that the apprentices are never allowed to go down in there. So they grab this apprentice, and they're like, well, you're gonna take us down there. And so he gets down to the bottom of the steps, and he has the key. He opens the door to these secret underground chambers, and it says there's a glyph of warding on there. And so I described him being blasted to little giblets. But the party was able to get inside, and the picture I showed earlier of Oscar Yoren with this dissected Haze Hulk or whatever it was, Delirium Dreg. It's down here that he was doing all his most secret work and dissecting the creatures and studying the delirium and everything. And there was another Easter egg down here, which I thought was pretty cool, because the text describes that Oscar Yoren has a statue down there of the, quote, goat-headed demon prince of undeath, which, of course, we all know is Orcus. In the chapel, they had described one of the saints fighting a two-headed demon with tentacles for arms, which was obviously supposed to be Demogorgon. So now they've brought the two big daddy demon princes into the campaign and into my campaign world. But they found a bunch of his notes down there. They found what they were looking for. They found some other scrolls and potions and so forth. And most importantly for our campaign, so Thaddeus is, now that he's back to his Thaddeus persona, he's looking for that missing family sort of tapestry rug thing that tells their family history. And I had already decided that it was being used by the cult of Orcus in the city before I even found out about this Easter egg. So I decided that Oscar Yoren had some notes that he's connected to the rest of the cult of Orcus in the city, in and around the city, and that it mentions that the family rug, of course, on the back of it, like the Declaration of Independence and National Treasure, on the back of this family rug is the last part of the incantation to summon, Orcus or his wand or one of his servants or whatever they're trying to do to end the world. So that was a big campaign moment for Thaddeus, because now he has a clue as to where he can complete his individual quest. Everybody has their individual quests in the Dungeons of Drakkenheim campaign. Anyway, so that's where we left things off. Hope you're enjoying our campaign recaps. If so, leave us a comment. Tell us what you think and what you think the party should be called. And join us back here next time. Thanks a lot.